everyone had a good Thanksgiving. And it's also good to see your smiling faces here today.
Yes.
All right. The story is told about a place down south where recent evacuations for a new highway had contributed to some flood problems. Volunteers risked their life to rescue victims stranded in the deluge. One old man was up to his knees in fast rising water when a rowboat came by to rescue him. They said to him, "Hop in, we will save you." A short while later, a motorboat was sent to save him. By this time, the water was over his waist. But again, he refused the offer, saying, "The Lord will save me and provide a way out." Soon the water was up to his chin, and now a helicopter came over and they asked him to grab the rope, saying, "This is your last chance." But again, he said no. He would trust in the Lord to help him out. The man eventually found himself at the pearly gates of heaven, suddenly facing St. Peter. He was angry when he realized that he had died and said to Peter, "The last thing I remember, I was in trouble praying up a storm, so why did you let me drown? Why didn't God answer my request when I trusted in Him?" St. Peter looked at him and shook his head and said, "We sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want?"
Right. That's what I thought.
That's right.
Well, as you know, we've been going through the book of Ruth, the story of Ruth, and we've seen a lot of troubles that Naomi and the family of Elimelech have been through. Naomi and Ruth were in trouble, and they were up to their necks in trouble, if you will, okay? Naomi and Ruth found themselves in need, and Naomi, who had probably been rich at one time, was now poor. God had brought her to her knees, and that's the way God does sometimes, right? He brings us to her knees. He tries to get our attention when we won't listen to Him. Naomi has gone away in full, but now she claims that the Lord has brought her back empty. Naomi needed help from God, and what does she get? All she gets is a Moabite daughter-in-law. You know? Doesn't seem like much. All she gets is her to tag along with her back to the town of Bethlehem. To some, this would seem like not a very good answer to our prayer. Okay? But as we will see, and as we continue on in the story, Ruth is exactly what Naomi needs in her life. Okay? So often we want to have our God answer our prayer requests in ways that will get our attention, and in supernatural ways. We expect it to happen, but a lot of times it's just in the everyday things of life that God answers prayer. Right?
That's right.
We don't always see it, do we? Well, I think that's the same way that happened with Naomi. She didn't see that God was in the process of blessing her and maybe answering her prayers. In our last study, we saw that Naomi was coming back to Bethlehem, Judah. She reminds us that a believer that fails God in some way can always come back to Him regardless of sins or past conduct in life, even if you've forsaken God. She reminds us that we can always come back. And God is there, willing and able to take her in, or take us in as well. Naomi illustrates and pictures for us a type of believer coming back to God and being restored into His good graces. Now, in his commentary, Warren Wiersbe says concerning this chapter, before God changes our circumstances, He wants to change our hearts. If our circumstances change for the better, but we remain the same, then we become worse. God's purpose in providence is not to make us comfortable, but to make us conformable. God's purpose is to shape and to conform us into the image of His Son, Jesus Christ. Christ-like character is God's goal in each and every one of us here today. Naomi was bitter against God, but Ruth was willing for God to have His way with her in her life. In the first days of Ruth's new life in a new land, we have illustrated for us a matter of spiritual growth. One commentator writes, the whole of the second chapter unfolds the divine process of spiritual growth and enlightenment. Physically, when we are born, we are babies, right? Everybody understands that. Yeah? And then we begin a process of growing up. The same is true in our spiritual walk with God. We start out as babies, right? When we are born again, we are spiritual babies and in the process of growing to become mature Christians. A new baby learns to walk, talk, and a new Christian enters a world in which everything is new. Spiritual growth is learning to talk and walk the new life as a Christian. Now, let's look at our text and notice Ruth's new life in a new land and how it illustrates the spiritual growth. We read in chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. She went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. We'll stop there.